Racist teacher fails black student, then learns his mom is the superintendent. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. James Carter adjusted his backpack as he walked into Westfield High, the sound of chatter and lockers slamming filling the hallways. It was a Monday morning, and like every other day, he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. James wasn't just any student. He was a top performer, known for his dedication and sharp intellect. His passion for history set him apart. He could spend hours reading about ancient civilizations or writing essays on pivotal historical events. But there was one obstacle that James couldn't seem to overcome. His history teacher, Mr. Gregson. Mr. Gregson was an older man with a stern demeanor and a reputation for being tough but fair, or at least that was how other students described him. For James, however, the experience was anything but fair. From the very first day of class, Mr. Gregson had made it clear that he saw James differently. His comments were often dismissive, his tone curt, and his expectations impossibly high. While other students received praise for their work, James was met with criticism, no matter how much effort he put in. As James entered the history classroom that morning, he noticed the word "fail" written in large letters on the whiteboard. Mr. Gregson stood at his desk, flipping through a stack of papers with a scowl. The students filed in and took their seats, exchanging nervous glances. It wasn't unusual for Mr. Gregson to start the day with a dramatic gesture, but this one felt particularly ominous. "All right, everyone," Mr. Gregson said, his voice sharp. "I graded your group projects over the weekend, and let me just say, I'm disappointed. Some of you clearly didn't take this assignment seriously." James felt a knot form in his stomach. He had worked tirelessly on the project, even going above and beyond to ensure his group's presentation was thorough and engaging. He glanced at his classmates, wondering who Mr. Gregson was about to single out. "Carter," Mr. Gregson said, his eyes narrowing as he looked directly at James. "Stand up." James's heart sank, but he rose from his seat, meeting Mr. Gregson's gaze with a mixture of confusion and defiance. "Yes, sir. Your group's project was sloppy and poorly researched," Mr. Gregson said, holding up a paper with a red F scrawled across the top. "And I can't help but notice that your contributions were particularly lacking." James's jaw tightened. "That's not true, sir," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I worked hard on this project. I spent hours researching and writing my portion." Mr. Gregson's expression darkened. "Are you questioning my judgment, Carter? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're trying to make excuses." The classroom fell silent, all eyes on James. He felt the weight of their gazes, but he refused to back down. "I'm not making excuses," he said. "I'm just telling the truth." Mr. Gregson slammed the paper down on his desk, his face red with anger. "Sit down, Carter," he barked. "And maybe next time you'll put in the effort required to succeed in this class." James sat down, his hands trembling with a mixture of anger and humiliation. He could feel the sting of tears threatening to well up, but he blinked them away, refusing to let Mr. Gregson see how much his words had affected him. The rest of the class passed in a blur, with James barely able to focus on the lecture. All he could think about was the injustice of it all. He had worked so hard, only to be dismissed and disrespected in front of his peers. When the bell finally rang, James gathered his things and left the classroom as quickly as he could. He didn't want to risk another confrontation with Mr. Gregson. As he walked down the hallway, his best friend, Malik, caught up with him. "Hey, man, what was that about?" Malik asked, concern etched on his face. "Gregson totally had it out for you," James sighed, shaking his head. "I don't know. It's like no matter what I do, he's determined to see me fail." "That's not right," Malik said. "You should tell someone. Go to the principal or something." James hesitated. While he knew Malik was right, he also knew that speaking up wouldn't be easy. Mr. Gregson was a respected teacher with years of experience, and James wasn't sure anyone would believe him over someone like that. "I'll think about it," James said finally, though the doubt in his voice was evident. That evening, James sat at the kitchen table, staring at the failed project in front of him. His mom, Dr. Angela Carter, walked in, carrying her briefcase and a folder of paperwork. As the superintendent of the school district, Angela was no stranger to the challenges students faced. But when she saw the look on James's face, she immediately knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" Angela asked, setting her things down and taking a seat across from him. James hesitated, unsure of how to begin. Finally, he held up the project. "Mr. Gregson gave me an F," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "He said I didn't do enough, but that's not true. I worked harder on this than anything else I've done this year." Angela frowned, examining the project closely. It was clear that James had put in a significant amount of effort. The research was thorough, the writing was clear, and the presentation was well organized. There was no logical reason for the failing grade. "This doesn't make sense," Angela said. "Have you had issues with Mr. Gregson before?" James nodded. "He's been on my case since the first day of school. No matter what I do, it's never good enough for him." Angela's expression hardened. "James, this isn't just about a grade. If he's treating you unfairly, we need to address it." James hesitated again. He didn't want to come across as a complainer, but he also knew that his mom was right. "What do we do?" he asked finally. Angela placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "First, we document everything. I want you to write down every instance where you feel like Mr. Gregson has treated you unfairly. Then I'll handle it from there." James nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time that day. He wasn't alone in this. His mom had his back, and he knew she wouldn't let him down. The next day, James began keeping a detailed record of Mr. Gregson's behavior. He noted every dismissive comment, every unfair criticism, and every instance of bias. By the end of the week, he had a list that painted a clear picture of the discrimination he had faced. Angela, meanwhile, had been quietly gathering information of her own. She reviewed Mr. Gregson's past performance evaluations and spoke with other parents and students who had experienced similar issues. What she found only reinforced her belief that action needed to be taken. The stage was set for a confrontation, and Angela was determined to ensure that justice would be served. The following week, Angela walked into Westfield High with a sense of purpose. She was there under the guise of a routine school visit, a part of her role as superintendent to observe classrooms and interact with students and staff. But her primary goal that day was clear: to see Mr. Gregson in action and gather firsthand evidence of the behavior James had described. Angela was greeted warmly by the principal, Ms. Reyes, who seemed eager to show her around the school. "We're so glad to have you here today, Dr. Carter," Ms. Reyes said. "Would you like to visit any specific classrooms?" "I'd like to start with Mr. Gregson's history class," Angela said, her tone professional. "I've heard great things about his teaching, and I'd like to see it for myself." Ms. Reyes hesitated for a moment, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "Right this way." As they approached the classroom, Angela could hear Mr. Gregson's voice through the door, delivering a lecture on the American Revolution. She stepped inside quietly, taking a seat at the back of the room. The students glanced at her briefly before returning their attention to the teacher, while Mr. Gregson barely acknowledged her presence. Angela observed carefully, taking note of Mr. Gregson's teaching style and his interactions with the students. At first, everything seemed normal. His lecture was engaging, and the students appeared attentive. But as the class progressed, it became clear that James's concerns were valid. When James raised his hand to answer a question, Mr. Gregson dismissed him with a curt, "Not now, Carter," before calling on another student. Later, when James tried to contribute to a discussion, Mr. Gregson interrupted him, saying, "Let's hear from someone else for a change." The other students exchanged uneasy glances, clearly aware of the bias but unsure of how to respond. Angela's expression remained neutral, but inside, her frustration was mounting. She had seen enough to confirm that Mr. Gregson's treatment of James was not only unfair but also unprofessional. It was time to take action. After the class ended, Angela approached Mr. Gregson as he gathered his materials. "Mr. Gregson," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Dr. Angela Carter, the superintendent. Thank you for letting me sit in on your class today." Mr. Gregson froze, his face paling as he processed her words. "Dr. Carter," he said, his voice stiff, "I wasn't aware you'd be visiting today. I like to keep my visits unannounced," Angela replied smoothly. "It gives me a more authentic perspective on what's happening in our schools." Mr. Gregson nodded, clearly uneasy. "Is there something I can help you with?" "As a matter of fact, there is," Angela said. "I'd like to have a conversation with you and Principal Reyes about some concerns that have been brought to my attention. Would you be available later this afternoon?" Mr. Gregson hesitated, but he had no choice but to agree. "Of course," he said, forcing a smile. "I'll be available." The meeting took place in the principal's office, with Angela seated at the head of the table. Ms. Reyes sat beside her, while Mr. Gregson fidgeted nervously across from them. Angela began by outlining her observations from the classroom, her tone calm but firm. "Mr. Gregson, I couldn't help but notice a pattern in your interactions with one of your students, James Carter," she said. "You dismissed his contributions multiple times during the lesson, even when he was actively trying to participate. This aligns with other concerns that have been brought to my attention regarding your treatment of him." Mr. Gregson bristled, his discomfort turning into defensiveness. "With all due respect, Dr. Carter, James isn't exactly a model student. He's disruptive and unmotivated, and I've had to hold him accountable for his behavior." Angela raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by his excuse. "I've reviewed James's academic record, and it tells a very different story," she said. "He's a high-achieving student with a strong work ethic. If there are issues in your classroom, it seems they may stem from your biases rather than his performance." Ms. Reyes shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly caught off guard by the confrontation. "Mr. Gregson," she said cautiously, "is there any validity to what Dr. Carter is saying? Have you been treating James differently from his peers?" Mr. Gregson hesitated, his face flushing. I don't believe so," he said finally. "But if that's the perception, I'm willing to reevaluate my approach." Angela leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. "This isn't just about perception, Mr. Gregson. It's about the impact your behavior has on your students. James has felt singled out and humiliated in your classroom, and that is unacceptable. As educators, it's our responsibility to create an environment where all students feel valued and supported." Angela then presented the evidence James had documented, including detailed notes on specific incidents of bias and unfair treatment. She also shared her own observations from the classroom, painting a clear picture of Mr. Gregson's behavior. Ms. Reyes reviewed the evidence with a furrowed brow, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. "This is concerning," she said finally, turning to Mr. Gregson. "I think it's clear that there's an issue here that needs to be addressed." Mr. Gregson opened his mouth to argue but quickly realized he had no defense. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "I never intended to make James feel unwelcome," he said quietly. "If I've made mistakes, I'll do what I can to make it right." Angela's expression softened slightly, though her resolve remained firm. "I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility," she said, "but words alone aren't enough. I'm recommending that you undergo mandatory sensitivity training and work with a mentor to improve your classroom practices. Additionally, James's grade on the project will be reviewed and adjusted based on his actual performance." Ms. Reyes nodded in agreement. "I'll ensure these steps are implemented immediately," she said. "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Dr. Carter." As the meeting concluded, Angela felt a sense of relief. While the process had been difficult, she knew it was a necessary step toward ensuring that James, and all students, received the respect and fairness they deserved. She left the school feeling confident that change was on the horizon. That evening, Angela shared the outcome of the meeting with James. "Your grade is being adjusted, and Mr. Gregson will be held accountable for his actions," she said. "But more importantly, this is a reminder that standing up for yourself matters. You have a voice, James, and it's powerful." James smiled, his confidence renewed. "Thanks, Mom," he said. "I couldn't have done this without you." Angela placed a hand on his shoulder, her pride evident. "You did this by being true to yourself," she said. "And that's something no one can take away from you." Over the following weeks, the changes initiated by Angela began to take effect at Westfield High. The first noticeable shift was in Mr. Gregson's demeanor. While his pride had clearly taken a hit after the meeting with Angela and Principal Reyes, it was evident that he was making an effort to adjust his behavior. During his lessons, he was more inclusive, actively engaging James and other students who had previously been overlooked. For James, the difference was palpable. Although Mr. Gregson's tone still carried a hint of reluctance, his actions spoke louder. He began calling on James to answer questions and acknowledging his contributions with genuine, if somewhat awkward, praise. The hostility that had once dominated their interactions was replaced by a tentative, albeit fragile, professionalism. James decided to give Mr. Gregson the benefit of the doubt. While he couldn't forget the humiliation he had endured, he recognized the effort being made and chose to focus on moving forward. He threw himself into his studies with renewed determination, proving not only to himself but also to the entire class that he was more than capable of excelling. One day, as James was leaving history class, Mr. Gregson stopped him by the door. "Carter," he said, his tone less harsh than usual, "I wanted to talk to you about your last essay." James raised an eyebrow, unsure of where this was going. "Yes, sir. It was impressive," Mr. Gregson admitted, his expression a mix of reluctance and sincerity. "You've clearly put in a lot of effort and it shows. Keep up the good work." James was momentarily taken aback. It wasn't exactly a heartfelt apology, but it was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever received from Mr. Gregson. "Thank you," he said, nodding politely before walking away. As he headed to his next class, James couldn't help but feel a small sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the praise. It was about knowing that he had earned it through hard work and resilience. For the first time, he felt like he was being seen for who he truly was, rather than being reduced to a stereotype. At home, James shared the interaction with his mom. Angela smiled, her pride evident. "That's a big step," she said. "It sounds like Mr. Gregson is starting to learn." "I guess," James said with a shrug. "But I'm not letting my guard down just yet." "And you shouldn't," Angela agreed. "Accountability is a process, not a one-time event. But the fact that he's making an effort is a sign that our actions are having an impact." James nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "I just want to focus on what I can control, my work, my goals. He doesn't get to dictate how far I go." "That's exactly the mindset you need," Angela said. "And remember, you have a whole community behind you. You're not in this alone." As news of the incident spread through the school, James began receiving support from unexpected places. Classmates who had previously stayed silent about Mr. Gregson's behavior started speaking up, sharing their own experiences and expressing solidarity with James. Teachers from other departments approached him to offer encouragement, praising his resilience and determination. One afternoon, during lunch, Malik joined James at their usual table. "Did you hear what happened in Ms. Harper's class today?" Malik asked, his eyes wide with excitement. "No, what?" James asked, taking a bite of his sandwich. "Apparently, one of the students called her out for giving harsher punishments to kids of color than to white kids," Malik said. "She tried to brush it off, but the whole class backed the student up. It was wild." James felt a spark of hope. "Sounds like people are starting to pay attention," he said. "Maybe things will actually change around here." "Thanks to you," Malik said, grinning. "You started something, man." James shook his head. "It wasn't just me. It was my mom, too. And everyone who's willing to speak up. This is bigger than just one person." Meanwhile, Angela continued her efforts to address systemic issues within the district. She held meetings with principals, teachers, and staff, emphasizing the importance of creating an inclusive and equitable environment for all students. She implemented district-wide training programs on implicit bias and cultural competency, ensuring that educators were equipped with the tools to recognize and challenge their own prejudices. One of Angela's key initiatives was the creation of a student advisory council, giving students a platform to share their concerns and ideas directly with district leadership. James was invited to join the council, and though he was initially hesitant, he eventually agreed, recognizing the opportunity to make a difference. At the council's first meeting, James found himself surrounded by a diverse group of students, each with their own unique experiences and perspectives. As they shared their stories, James realized just how widespread the issues of bias and discrimination were, and how much work needed to be done. "We all have a role to play in this," James said, addressing the group. "It's not just about fixing the problems we see. It's about building something better for the future. And that starts with us." The other students nodded in agreement, their determination evident. Together, they began brainstorming ideas for initiatives and events that could promote unity and understanding within their schools. From cultural awareness workshops to peer mentoring programs, the council was determined to leave a lasting impact. Back at Westfield High, the atmosphere was beginning to shift. While there was still much progress to be made, the changes were undeniable. Students felt more empowered to speak out against injustice, and teachers were more mindful of their actions and words. The school was becoming a place where everyone could feel valued and respected, a place where all students had the opportunity to thrive. For James, the transformation was deeply personal. He had gone from feeling isolated and dismissed to being at the forefront of a movement for change. His experiences had taught him the importance of resilience, advocacy, and the power of community. One day, as James walked through the halls, he noticed a flyer on the bulletin board for a district-wide essay contest. The theme was overcoming adversity, and James immediately felt inspired. He spent the next few weeks pouring his heart into the essay, reflecting on his journey and the lessons he had learned. When the winners were announced, James's name was at the top of the list. At the awards ceremony, he stood on stage, holding his trophy as the audience applauded. As he looked out into the crowd, he saw his mom smiling proudly, her eyes shining with tears. "This isn't just my story," James said as he accepted the award. "It's the story of everyone who's ever faced challenges and found the strength to overcome them. It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, and knowing that we're stronger together." The days following the essay contest were transformative for James. Winning the award not only validated his efforts but also gave him a newfound platform to speak on issues that mattered to him. His story had resonated with people far beyond the school walls, and invitations to share his experiences started pouring in, from local events to community panels. One of the most significant invitations came from the school board, which was holding a district-wide town hall to address systemic inequities in education. Angela had already been deeply involved in organizing the event, and when James was invited to be a keynote speaker, she couldn't have been prouder. On the night of the event, the auditorium was packed with parents, students, teachers, and administrators. The energy in the room was electric, a mix of anticipation and determination. James sat backstage, his heart pounding as he reviewed his speech. Despite his nerves, he knew this was an opportunity to make a real difference. When his name was announced, James took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, and as he approached the podium, he felt a wave of confidence wash over him. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady but heartfelt. "I want to start by thanking everyone here tonight for coming together to have this important conversation. It's not always easy to talk about issues like bias and discrimination, but it's the first step toward meaningful change." James went on to share his story, recounting his experiences in Mr. Gregson's classroom and the journey that had led him to this moment. He spoke about the pain of being underestimated and the power of standing up for oneself. But most importantly, he emphasized the role that community played in overcoming adversity. "This isn't just about one teacher or one student," James said, his voice resonating through the auditorium. "It's about all of us, the choices we make, the actions we take, and the example we set for others. Change starts with each of us, and together, we can create a system where every student feels seen, heard, and valued." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet in a standing ovation. As James stepped away from the podium, he felt a deep sense of pride and fulfillment. He had turned his pain into purpose, and he knew this was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, James became a prominent voice for change within the district. He continued to work with the Student Advisory Council, spearheading initiatives that addressed issues like implicit bias, cultural representation in the curriculum, and equitable access to resources. His peers admired his leadership, and his teachers began to see him not just as a student but as a force for positive change. One of the council's most ambitious projects was a Day of Understanding, a district-wide event that brought students, teachers, and parents together to celebrate diversity and foster dialogue. The day featured workshops, cultural performances, and panel discussions, all aimed at breaking down stereotypes and building connections. James played a central role in organizing the event, working tirelessly to ensure its success. On the day of the event, the school gymnasium was transformed into a vibrant space filled with art, music, and conversation. The atmosphere was one of unity and celebration, a stark contrast to the division that had once plagued the school. As James walked through the event, he felt a deep sense of pride. He saw students of different backgrounds laughing and learning together, teachers engaging in meaningful discussions, and parents expressing their gratitude for the opportunity to connect. It was a testament to what could be achieved when people came together with open hearts and minds. That afternoon, James sat in on a panel discussion about the role of educators in promoting equity. Among the panelists was Mr. Gregson, who had undergone months of sensitivity training and mentoring as part of his efforts to grow. James watched as Mr. Gregson spoke about the lessons he had learned and the changes he had made in his teaching approach. "I'll admit, I made mistakes," Mr. Gregson said, his voice filled with humility. "I let my biases cloud my judgment, and I failed to see the potential in some of my students. But thanks to the support and accountability I've received, I've been able to reflect and grow. I'm committed to doing better, not just for my students but for myself." As the discussion continued, James found himself feeling a mix of emotions. While he couldn't forget the pain Mr. Gregson had caused, he could see that the teacher was making an effort to change. It wasn't about forgiveness, James realized. It was about recognizing growth and holding on to the hope that people could learn from their mistakes. By the end of the Day of Understanding was hailed as a resounding success. The feedback from attendees was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing a desire for similar events in the future. James and the Advisory Council received praise for their hard work, and the event became a model for other schools in the district. At home that evening, James and Angela reflected on everything they had accomplished. Sitting in the living room, they shared a quiet moment of pride and gratitude. "You've done so much," Angela said, her voice filled with emotion. "Not just for yourself, but for everyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong. You've created something truly meaningful." James smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said. "You've always believed in me, even when things were tough." Angela placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's because I see who you are, James. You're strong, you're brilliant, and you're capable of changing the world. And you've already started." James nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "This is just the beginning," he said. "There's so much more to do, and I'm ready for it." As the school year progressed, James continued to thrive, both academically and personally. His leadership on the Student Advisory Council and his efforts to promote equity within the school district had earned him widespread respect from his peers and teachers alike. But more importantly, James felt a newfound sense of confidence. He had proven to himself and to everyone around him that he was capable of overcoming even the most difficult challenges. One day, during a council meeting, James and his fellow members brainstormed their next big initiative. The topic of representation in the curriculum came up, and the group quickly agreed that this was an area that needed attention. "History class is supposed to teach us about the world," James said, his voice thoughtful. "But most of the time, it only tells one side of the story. We need to make sure that all voices are included, not just the ones that have always been in the textbooks." The other students nodded in agreement, their passion for the issue evident. They decided to launch a campaign called Our Voices, Our Stories, aimed at diversifying the curriculum and ensuring that students learned about contributions from people of all backgrounds. The campaign included everything from petitions and presentations to meetings with district leaders. James took the lead, using his platform to advocate for the importance of representation in education. His speeches were powerful, filled with examples of historical figures and events that had been overlooked or misrepresented in traditional narratives. As the campaign gained momentum, it caught the attention of local media. Reporters interviewed James and his fellow council members, highlighting their efforts to create a more inclusive educational experience. The coverage sparked a broader conversation within the community, with parents, teachers, and students all weighing in on the importance of diverse representation. One evening, as James was preparing for a presentation to the school board, Angela walked into his room with a proud smile. "You've really started something special," she said, sitting down beside him. James looked up from his notes, his expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. "I just hope they listen," he said. "This is so important, but I know it's going to take time." Angela placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "You've already made a huge impact, James. And even if it takes time, the work you're doing is planting seeds for the future. Don't underestimate the power of what you're doing." James nodded, taking her words to heart. "Thanks, Mom. That means a lot." The presentation to the school board was a turning point. James stood before the board members, his fellow council members, and a packed audience of community members. With his usual calm confidence, he outlined the goals of Our Voices, Our Stories campaign and presented concrete examples of how the curriculum could be expanded to include a wider range of perspectives. "This isn't about erasing history," James said, his voice steady. "It's about telling the full story. When we learn about diverse voices and experiences, we gain a deeper understanding of the world and each other. And that's something we all benefit from." The room erupted into applause as James finished his presentation. The board members, many of whom had been skeptical at first, were visibly moved by his words. After a brief discussion, they voted unanimously to create a committee dedicated to revising the district's curriculum to ensure greater inclusivity. For James and his peers, it was a victory worth celebrating. But they knew their work wasn't finished. The committee's efforts would take time, and there would undoubtedly be challenges along the way. Still, the progress they had made was a testament to what could be achieved through persistence and collaboration. Meanwhile, Mr. Gregson continued his journey of growth and reflection. The sensitivity training and mentoring he had undergone had opened his eyes to the biases he had carried for so long. He began to see his role as a teacher in a new light, understanding that it was about more than just delivering lessons. It was about empowering students to reach their full potential. One afternoon, Mr. Gregson asked James to stay after class. James hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to expect, but ultimately decided to hear him out. "Carter," Mr. Gregson began, his tone uncharacteristically gentle. "I wanted to apologize again for the way I treated you earlier this year. I was wrong, and I've been working to make things right. Not just with you, but with all of my students." James regarded him carefully, his expression neutral. "I appreciate the apology," he said finally, "and I've noticed the changes you've been making. It's a good start." Mr. Gregson nodded, his relief evident. "I still have a lot to learn, but I'm committed to doing better. If there's ever anything I can do to support you, please don't hesitate to let me know." James nodded, his own tone softening. "Thank you, Mr. Gregson. I hope you keep working at it." As James left the classroom, he felt a sense of closure. While he couldn't forget the pain Mr. Gregson had caused, he was willing to acknowledge the effort being made to grow and change. It was a reminder that accountability and growth were possible, even for those who had stumbled. As the school year drew to a close, Westfield High was a different place from the one James had walked into at the beginning of the year. The atmosphere was one of inclusion and empowerment, with students and teachers alike working together to create a better environment. And while there was still work to be done, the progress that had been made was undeniable. For James, the journey had been one of transformation. He had faced adversity head-on, using his experiences to drive meaningful change. And in the process, he had discovered his own strength and potential. At the school's end-of-year assembly, James was invited to give a speech as a representative of the student body. Standing on the stage, he looked out at the sea of faces. His peers, his teachers, his family, and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "This year has taught me so much," James began, his voice steady. "It's taught me that adversity can be a catalyst for growth, that standing up for what's right can create ripple effects far beyond what we imagine, and that change is possible when we work together." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I want to thank everyone who's been a part of this journey. My friends, my family, my teachers, and everyone who's spoken up and taken action. We still have a long way to go, but I know we're on the right path. And I'm excited to see what we can achieve together." The applause was deafening as James stepped away from the podium. Angela, sitting in the front row, wiped away a tear as she watched her son receive a standing ovation. She couldn't have been prouder of the young man he had become, a leader, an advocate, and a source of inspiration for everyone around him. As the applause from the assembly died down, James stepped off the stage, his heart full and his mind brimming with thoughts about the future. This was only the beginning of his journey. The challenges he had faced at Westfield High had shown him not only the importance of standing up for justice, but also the power of collective action. With the school year coming to a close, James felt ready to take on whatever lay ahead. In the days that followed, Angela found herself reflecting on how much James had grown over the past year. She had always known her son was resilient, but seeing him rise above the adversity he faced and use it to drive meaningful change filled her with pride. She knew his story would inspire others, both within their community and beyond. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Angela brought up the topic of the future. "You've accomplished so much this year," she said, looking at James with admiration. "What's next for you? Have you thought about how you want to keep making an impact?" James smiled, his expression contemplative. "I've been thinking about it a lot," he admitted. "I know I want to keep advocating for change, whether it's through education, activism, or something else. I feel like this year has shown me how much work there is to do, and I want to be part of that." Angela nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "Whatever path you choose, I know you'll make a difference," she said. "You have a gift, James, and the world needs people like you to lead the way." James felt a surge of gratitude for his mom. Her unwavering support had been his anchor through the toughest times, and he knew he wouldn't be where he was without her. "Thanks, Mom," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "That means a lot." As the summer began, James decided to channel his energy into community projects. He partnered with local organizations to host workshops for students, focusing on topics like leadership, advocacy, and navigating challenges. The workshops were a resounding success, with participants expressing their appreciation for the chance to learn and grow. One of the most memorable moments came when a young boy named Malik, just 8 years old, approached James after a workshop. "I want to be like you when I grow up," Malik said, his eyes wide with admiration. "You're really brave." James crouched down to Malik's level, a warm smile spreading across his face. "You already have everything you need to make a difference," he said. "Just be yourself, stand up for what's right, and never stop believing in your potential." Malik beamed, his confidence bolstered by James's words. For James, it was a reminder of why he had started this journey in the first place. Every conversation, every connection, and every step forward was a chance to create a ripple effect of positive change. As the new school year approached, Angela received an email from Ms. Reyes, the principal of Westfield High. The subject line read, "Update on changes at Westfield." Curious, Angela opened the email and read through the detailed account of the progress the school had made over the summer. Ms. Reyes wrote about the new equity initiatives, the updated curriculum that reflected diverse perspectives, and the continued professional development for teachers. She also shared the results of a recent student survey, which showed a significant increase in feelings of belonging and inclusion among the student body. "Much of this progress can be traced back to James and his efforts," Ms. Reyes wrote. "He has not only inspired change but has also set an example for what it means to lead with integrity and courage. We're proud to have him as a part of our community." Angela forwarded the email to James, her heart swelling with pride. As she hit send, she thought about how far they had come and how much further they could go. On the first day of the new school year, James walked through the doors of Westfield High with his head held high. The atmosphere was different now, lighter, more welcoming. As he passed by teachers and students, he was met with smiles, nods, and words of encouragement. "Good to see you back, James," one teacher said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Thanks," James replied, his confidence shining through. "It's good to be back." In history class, Mr. Gregson greeted James with a respectful nod. The tension that had once defined their relationship was gone, replaced by a mutual understanding. While their journey hadn't been easy, both had grown from the experience. As James took his seat, he noticed a new addition to the classroom. A poster on the wall that read, "Every voice matters." It was a simple message, but one that carried profound meaning. For James, it was a reminder of the change he had fought for and the change he had helped create. As the weeks turned into months, James continued to thrive. He excelled academically, maintained his leadership role on the Student Advisory Council, and remained active in his community work. His story became a beacon of hope, inspiring others to stand up for themselves and for what they believed in. And while his journey was far from over, James knew he wasn't walking it alone. He had his mom, his friends, and an entire community behind him, ready to support him every step of the way. Looking back on the year, James realized that the challenges he had faced had shaped him in ways he never could have imagined. They had taught him resilience, empathy, and the power of using his voice to create change. As he looked ahead to the future, James felt a deep sense of purpose. He didn't know exactly where his path would lead, but he knew one thing for certain. He was ready to make a difference.